Once you were old enough, what were the dark family secrets you were finally letting on? Grandma didn't decide to move in with us because she loved us so much and wanted to spend more time with us. Grandma moved in because her son was a meth addict and convinced her to put his name on the house, take all the money out of it for renovations, and leave her homeless. She had a heart attack the night she found out and now has to live with a pacemaker. FKU Uncle Roy. My cousins lived with us for a while and we thought that was fun because it's like a sleepover every day. One time our mom even took us out of school to pick them up. I learned later that it was because Child Protective Services took my cousins away from their mom because of mental health issues. My mom offered to take her sister's kids until she got her mental health back in order. My cousins live with their mom now and their mom is in a much better condition mentally. My grandma retired and she still decided to work for her brother in his restaurant to save up money for when she dies. Funerals are, obviously, expensive. She insisted he would hold onto her paychecks and pay for her funeral when she dies. He never did. My father got my mother pregnant when he was her teacher in high school. He was 30 and married. She was 15 and his student. They ran off together, he got a divorce, and they got married in a state that allowed marriage at 16, 2 months before my older brother was born. Grandma's top secret pie crust was actually just Marie calendars from the grocery store, set in a fancier dish. She messed with her daughters-in-law for years over it. My dad's uncle died in a boating accident with his cousins. My family let me know he was possibly drowned in the middle of the lake by his cousins because of some money issues. No one was ever prosecuted though and the family is still very close. Weird. My dad is in a cult, wasn't much of a secret, but as a kid you just kinda assume everything your parents do is the norm. My parents led me to believe that my grandfather, on my mother's side, had died due to a heart attack. A year later they revealed he actually shot himself in the head. To put it shortly, my family tree is more like a very long branch. Yes, we have the genetic defects to prove it. My uncle is believed to have murdered 2 Australian police officers in the late 80s. My grandma actually legally disowned my mother for marrying my dad. The family house was supposed to go to my mom, but after the disowning, Grandma didn't say who she wanted house to go to, resulting in a decades-long family feud that has split the family even to this day. Sad thing is, my parents actually ended up divorced after 20 years of marriage. Mom took care of my grandma till the end and was the one who handled the funeral arrangements when my grandma passed 2 years ago. She never asked for the house back. It's worth millions. Nobody told me any of this until I was 30. My step-grandfather molested my 3 aunties, my eldest sister and possibly my other sister and cousin. Only found out when my nana was dying 11 years after he died. They are buried side by side and I cannot bring myself to go visit my nana because he is there also. The reason I had a live-in babysitter when I was 5 that moved in at 2 a.m. was because my mom's cousin killed 2 kids and we ended up harboring his daughter during the trial. Hess the only person on death row in my county. Not so much letting on, as we found out by accident. But apparently my dad's first love and him got into a serious car crash when he was 25 and she died. He lived with her father for years after her death. He still occasionally comes to visit my dad, even 30 years later. We were always told he was a mentor until my sister pressed my mom on the subject. One of my sisters is even named after the girl that died, middle name, and we never even knew about her until last year. None of us have ever brought it up with him. Great-grandpa was a soldier opposing the Axis powers. Him and his squad were caught by Italian troops and given the death penalty along with his friends. They would be executed together. At the time of the execution all of his mates died in front of his eyes but he survived because the soldier missed. Without skipping a beat he faked his death by while lying on top of his deceased friends' bodies. Surprisingly it worked and he got to escape. That my cousin was actually my half-brother. Mom got pregnant in college and my aunt and uncle adopted him. And that my dad wasn't my biological father. Mom and dad got divorced, she got pregnant by another man, and my dad wasn't able to have kids of his own so they got remarried and he raised me as his own. When my grandfather died, he wrote his will on his deathbed. He left his entire estate to my family, which was enormous. His wife however, who despised us, in the biggest FKU move I've ever seen, wrote a directly conflicting will, leaving the estate to her family, none of whom I've ever met, and then killed herself. It took around 5 years in legal hell to sort that out. We ended up winning the case in the end, but it cost so much that we couldn't afford to keep his $3 million house anymore. My grandparents spent some time in lockup after my grandpa killed their newborn in a shell-shock-induced frenzy. They were jailed because they buried her body in a cave and tried to hide it. My mom and her siblings were all adopted out very young and went back to their parents around 11 years or so later. I knew that growing up, but didn't know why until I was older. That my grandpa molested all the women in our family, not just me, and they let it happen because that's just what you do. When I was about 10, my cousin and his dad died. I always thought it was an accident, and on the same day. When I was old enough, I was told that his dad actually committed suicide and my cousin followed him couple months later. Truly devastated me, although I didn't know them well. My dad's sister had a secret daughter that would have been approximately his age. She was 16 years older than him, and the family didn't tell him until he was in college. In their small town, there's a not zero chance he could have /did date his niece. My aunt started the Communist Party in her country. It got quite large, her children fled the country, and I still don't know what happened to her. My grandmother ran off and had an affair, got pregnant, came back to my grandfather. They raised the baby girl together. My father and his siblings didn't find out until they were older. I'm not sure if my aunt knew the truth before she passed away. It's also rumored that there's another half-sibling somewhere out there, so granddad seemed to be having an affair as well. Just affairs all round back in the day. My parents were going to abort me, but his friend stopped him. My dad named me after his friend. My dad and I have a great relationship now though, lol. My grandfather got out of serving in Vietnam by robbing pharmacies and going to jail for years. Quite literally a dark family secret. Being a white-ass blonde-haired blue-eyed little rat bastard at 6 and finding out my bio dad is black. Funny enough, my best friend at the time was whiter than me with blonde hair, blue eyes, also had a black bio dad. I guess our mums were just super fucking white. I'm starting to think my family is just boring. Kinda hard to compete with a fascist great-grandfather or the plethora of affairs. My grandmother's first husband was extremely abusive, but this was the 60s and he hid it well. She couldn't file for divorce without proof of injury, so she beat herself in the face with a slipper to get away. She was 21 or 22 or so with 3 young children. I'm 23 right now and I could never imagine. She was such a strong lady, I miss her. 3. Got a Facebook message from one guy asking if I was related to my dad, since it's not a common last name. I thought he was a fan of his work, because I was in college at the time and the guy was about the same age as me. And that's how I found out my dad slept around and that I had a half-brother the same age as me. I have 2, the first one being that one of my uncles, who I had spoken to a lot when I was younger, was arrested from having CP. His dad was in a similar spot, and needless to say, after that I lost contact with that side of the family as they refused to tell law enforcement for far too long. The other family secret was my dad had been shot and killed in a different state only a little bit after my birth. Miraculously enough, I never noticed any absence of a father figure in my youth, and I just learned about it out of the blue. I always thought my Uncle Dan died in a car accident. Turned out he owed a lot of money to a loan shark. He and his partner were asked to play Russian roulette, and one survives can walk away and get an extension for payment. Uncle wasn't lucky. I was never told much, but when I was about 15 my grandmother started getting dementia and had a breakdown. All I could understand was that she kept repeating, "We are traitors." I know she was sent to some sort of children's camp during World War II to be away from the fighting. I think it was called Kinderland. I believe she never saw her parents again, and it took decades to find her sister. I will have to ask my aunt one day. Maybe she can tell me more. My grandmother's sister, my great-aunt, got pregnant of wedlock in the 1950s. She was put up in a birthing home and the child was adopted out. She hid the whole thing from her while family minus my grandmother, the eldest of the family of 8 and the one who helped hide her. After she had the baby she came back home after living with her sister for a while. No one knew till about 10 years ago. My mom, for him, he is a nice man that had an average childhood with parents that loved him, fortunately. My mom's bio father lost custody of her in the late 70s during my grandma's and his divorce. She never knew why. Come to find out years later, some kind of freaky porn was found in his possession that caused him to lose custody. My mom then realized that the memories of him staring at her while she was changing and touching her weirdly when she was child meant it was probably CP that the courts found. My grandmother tried to murder my grandfather when she got sick of him beating the shit out of her every day. She swung an axe at him and he blocked it with his hand and lost his thumb. She left him before I was born. My father cheated on my mom with my sister and his horse riding instructor. We'd always thought it ended amicably. We only found this out while Mom was admitting to having contemplated driving off the road with us in the car as kids, as opposed to raising us as a single mom with no career or stable job. My grandfather isn't my biological grandfather. My grandma was raped in high school with her not knowing who the original father was, so the man who would be my grandfather took it upon himself to raise a child you do not belong to him. Double whammy, I suppose. Didn't look like my parents or siblings, so I thought I was adopted. Ask, Mom brushes it off. Dad does too. Dig, find some info, prepare my case. Around the same time I almost get abducted, super scary. Mom was mortified. After, I was sat down and told I have a different father who I look like and he had just tried to abduct me. So not adopted but man who I thought was my dad wasn't. Good times.